So, because I'd rather not pretend that I'm dead for another year, but the next couple ideas I have for this channel are going to be about as long, if not longer than the last one, I want to just give my general thoughts on some things that I'm interested in during that time. These videos aren't really meant to be critiques with my full thoughts, but just my general opinion on the topics without a significant amount of thought put into them. So keep that in mind because I'll probably get some things wrong, although I will try to be as accurate as possible here and in future videos. Sonic is a series that I have had a lot of investment in, even though I'm aware that they've not had a lot of good games in recent years. I've watched the cartoons, I've read the comics, I've played just about all of their games, but I have no disillusion about their quality. And the same can probably be said about these films, and I say probably because I haven't actually seen the second film yet. So you can rest assured that there won't be any spoilers until the second half of the video. Just keep that in mind as we go along. Oh yeah, this is all unscripted, by the way. So, I don't really think that Sonic 1 and 2 were really great films. I'm not even sure if they were necessarily good films. I do think that they're worth supporting, if not because they've certainly been better than other video game films in the past. Way better. They also have a level of authenticity to them that I think makes them worth supporting. Like, the most obvious thing, at least about the first film, that I think comes to mind is the whole redesign for Sonic, basically. They didn't need to do that. They didn't need to do that, but they did. And pretty much, I'm convinced that any other kind of video game film wouldn't have even bothered. And just the fact that they went to that much trouble, I think that they're worth supporting. And I think that you guys should support them, because I think that other studios should know this is the kind of attention that we want given to any kind of film. This is especially the kind of attention that we want given to video game films. Because I would love to live in a world where all video game films are at their worst, like Sonic 1 and 2. But when I say a level of authenticity, I also mean in regards to the source material. Sonic 1 especially definitely feels almost like Iron Man in a sense that it wasn't necessarily something groundbreaking, but it clearly understood its source material and laid the groundwork for what would eventually become all the other films that came after. There's not a whole lot in Sonic 1, but it definitely looks like there's a lot more in Sonic 2. For instance, one of the first tracks that plays in the first movie is the theme to Sonic Mania, which was composed by Tee Lopes, and it's great that they got one of his most iconic songs in an officially licensed Sonic movie. Because Tee Lopes originally started off as just another fan who was making remixes of Sonic-level music, and then he was eventually brought on to an officially licensed Sonic fan game, and now his song is in a feature film. That's really cool. I would prefer it if he could help a little bit more on the soundtrack. I would like to hear more of his music just in the movies in general, but just this little nod I think is really cool. I also think it's great that they brought back the voice actress for Tails from the video games, because they didn't need to do that. They could have gotten, like, you know, some other kind of person. They didn't need to do that. But they did. I do wish that they could have gotten all the voice actors for the different, for Sonic and Knuckles. And especially Eggman. Mike Pollock is an absolutely fantastic voice actor, and I hope that any one of them, you know, gets, like, maybe a cameo at some point in the future, because I think they're all great. But I don't know. There were also some little hints and nods to a bunch of other things in Sonic media in general, though some of it could have just been my imagination. One of the things that comes to mind is that at the very end, Sonic gets his own bed, which is a race car, which feels like it's a nod to Sonic's bed from the comics, which was also a race car, though the one in the comics features a number 5 on the side, and there wasn't one in the film, so, like I said, maybe it could just be coincidence. Sonic's dislike of mushrooms was also something that I immediately interpreted as a jab against Mario, because Mario does like mushrooms, although it's more likely that this is Mushroom Forest from Sonic and Knuckles, but either of those could also just be coincidence. What isn't coincidence and something that I did like was the inclusion of the Echidna clan at the beginning of the film that attacks Sonic. This is what I mean when it feels like this is like Iron Man, because it is setting up something that doesn't have a huge amount of significance in this film, but will very clearly come back later, and I get the impression that this will also turn up in Sonic 2, maybe even films afterwards. Granted, all of these are very, small, but I mean, compared to most other video game films, there's usually not nearly this much self-awareness of the source material. And that's why I think that you should go out and watch Sonic 2, because I think that these kinds of projects are worth supporting. Because it shows future filmmakers that we want them to be respectful and mindful to their source material, and actively engage and listen to its fan base. Which is something that another video game adaptation currently could probably use a lot of, and doesn't have a lot of. But whether or not you should continue supporting these films after Sonic 2 probably all depends on how good they are, and unfortunately Sonic 1, at least, has a lot to be desired. Like I said, it's still a far cry from what we're used to, but this is no Castlevania or Arcane for that matter. The story goes that Sonic is traveling from world to world using these special rings so that he can prevent people from finding out about his power, and now he's just laying low, trying to keep people from finding out about his existence, because if they do, he has to keep moving so that nobody ever finds out about his power. Then, when he gets the attention of Dr. Robotnik, he tries to leave, but is accidentally shot by the local sheriff named Tom, and then he drops his rings through a portal that ends up on the top of the Trans-America Pyramid in San Francisco, and Tom agrees to help Sonic get his rings back so that he can leave Earth, all while evading Dr. Robotnik and growing his friends along the way. The whole point of Sonic's story is that because he's been running his whole life and he's never really been allowed to make friends with other people because he's always been hiding, he doesn't really have any friends, and so that kind of makes the relationship that he has with Tom a lot more meaningful from his perspective. And the conclusion of his arc is that he ultimately decides to stay on Earth because he decides that protecting your friends is what's most important. They try to mirror this somewhat with Tom's story. Tom is given a job at the San Francisco Police Department, which he's really excited for because in Green Hills, there's really not a lot of stuff that happens here, and he's very passionate about wanting to actually do things that matter to him and actually saving real people instead of doing mundane stuff like getting bagels back from ducks. And by the end of the film, he also decides to stay in Green Hills, which is kind of weird because the two situations aren't really comparable. Where Sonic's whole situation is framed as entirely a bad thing, Tom's, on the other hand, can't be seen as anything but good. He gets to move up in the world. He gets to do a job that he actually enjoys and that he really wants to do. He doesn't have to be stuck here anymore. And there's really not a whole lot that they do to try to frame this as a bad thing, so it almost kind of feels like he gets screwed over in the end. I don't know, it just doesn't really balance out very well, but I suppose it's not horrible. In fact, if anything, I was much more interested in Dr. Eggman than I was in either Tom or Sonic. Robotnik is kind of like... God, this is really dumb. He's kind of like a child-friendly Walter White. just nowhere near as good. He's played off as this guy who is just extremely arrogant, who just always wants to, show off how superior he is to everyone else, and he even keeps around his own... his own Jesse Pinkman, basically. Someone who he views as inferior to him, so that he has an excuse to feel superior. And that's his relationship with Dr. Stone, basically, which I think is kind of interesting. A lot of this was supposedly brought about because he was bullied as a child, which Dr. Eggman brings up on a couple occasions, and unfortunately this isn't really background information that's delivered very naturally. And that's probably one of the first major criticisms I have for this film, is that Sonic 1 just really does not know how to deliver expository dialogue in a way that is natural. The opening monologue, I don't know, it feels kind of rushed to me. That could just be a personal thing. A lot of other times Sonic will just outright state how he feels, even when we can very clearly understand how he feels. Like at the baseball stadium at the beginning of the film, after he does his thing, he literally just says out loud that he feels alone, when the tone of the scene and the music could have, we could have inferred that much just from that alone. You didn't need to tell us this. They also do this later, just as another example. After Tom shoots him in the leg, he looks at Tom's shirt, which has the Transamerica Pyramid on it, and he whispers San Francisco, and then that's where the portal opens up and he drops his rings to. But, like, again, we could have inferred that. We could have, just by focusing on the shirt with San Francisco on it and the Transamerica Pyramid on it, we could have inferred that that's the reason why the portal opened up to that area, and that's why he dropped the rings there. You didn't need to have him say that. And there's a couple of other, in fact, there's quite a few scenes that are like that, but those are just a couple examples. I suppose I could believe that someone who hasn't had a whole lot of friends and has remained mostly antisocial for most of his life would develop a habit of talking to himself. I just don't really see what that adds to the narrative when we can already tell that he's very alone. Even if, like, it would make sense for him to talk to himself, I just don't see what else it necessarily adds that wasn't already there to begin with, and it just delivers information redundantly. Even Robotnik does this on a couple occasions, though I don't think he does it as many times as Sonic does. The most notable occasions is when he just outright states his backstory to the audience. A lot of it feels a tad bit forced. I don't necessarily know how to explain why I feel like it was forced, so again, that could just be a personal thing. But speaking of forced, there were also a couple of elements in the premise that I found a tad bit contrived. The first thing that comes to mind is the quill that Sonic leaves around. So at the beginning, after there was a big electrical surge that Sonic released, and that's how Eggman found out where he is, Tom finds a quill, one of Sonic's quills, in his house, just laying on his table, this big blue glowy quill, and he just never noticed it there before. And this is important because this quill is then later found by Eggman, and that's how he enhances his Eggmobile to keep up with Sonic and also track him. There's not a scene where Sonic ever goes inside the house, and hell, we don't even see when the quill falls out or how. Because if this is a common occurrence, that does kind of raise the question, are there just hundreds of quills just all around Green Hills? Does that mean that Eggman could go around collecting these things and make, like, a bunch of robots that are all super duper fast? I don't know, it's just kind of weird to me. I think another contrivance that also sticks out in my mind is that after Robotnik begins his search for Sonic, the first thing that he comes across is a footprint. And of course it's Sonic's footprint, and he analyzes it and figures out that this doesn't belong to any other animal, and he's like, oh, well, this thing must have caused the surge. But why did he bother looking at the footprint? Why bother investigating it, when, for all he knew, it could have just been an ordinary footprint? Like, what if he literally just came across a normal-ass footprint? Like, he would have spent all his time analyzing this footprint, and it would have been, nothing. Like, what exactly was the point? The biggest contrivance, though, in my opinion, is how Sonic loses his rings. After he finds out that Eggman is onto him, he goes back to his cave because he has to get ready to leave. Robots start closing in on the area, and instead of just, leaving, he decides to run all the way to Tom's house when there really isn't any need to. But he has to be at Tom's house because otherwise he can't be shot so he can lose his rings so that we can have the rest of the film. And by the way, the fact that he was shot at all is also really contrived, because there's a number of times when he's shown to just see things in slow motion. So, like, the fact that he doesn't react to not even a bullet, but like a dart being fired at him, and that he isn't able to dodge it, just it feels like the most contrived part of the entire premise, because he wouldn't have lost his rings otherwise. And actually, that's another thing that I feel is kind of inconsistent, is Sonic's speed in general. It's probably not as inconsistent as I think other people have said it is, but there's at least a couple of other times I felt like he should have gone faster than he did and just didn't. Besides the dart, another example that comes to mind is when they get to the Transamerica Pyramid, Sonic could just run along the walls and get to the very top, but instead he decides to go through the building up to the top and then realizes that the top door is locked. So since Tom is a police officer, he decides that he'll get him up to the top of the building. But again, none of this is necessary. Sonic can literally run on walls, and he's even shown to do this in the very first scene in the film, and he just doesn't. And I mean, it probably would have been the more sensible decision too, because at the time, Tom is a fugitive, which is another thing that's dropped almost entirely once Robotnik is dealt with. Like, why why wouldn't they be interested in interrogating Tom if they know that he's been in contact with someone as dangerous as Sonic? Like, doesn't that still kind of make him dangerous? They just trust that Tom doesn't know anything about Sonic and just let him go on his word? What if this happens again? Wouldn't they at least want to know what happened to Robotnik since he was a valuable asset to the US government? That's another thing, is that they seem really disinterested in what all Robotnik does and what happened to him. Now, since it's the end of the film, I can't say for certain that they didn't try looking for him, but it definitely seems weird that they wouldn't at least want to try to talk to... They wouldn't at least try to interrogate Tom a little bit more to figure out what happened to him, because clearly he knows. He very clearly has some idea what happened to Eggman. But even before then, Eggman doesn't really have a lot of supervision in this film, which is important because there's a number of times when he just straight up kills some people. And I mean, they don't focus on it, but in the chase scene during the third act, as Sonic is running through the city, Eggman just straight up blows up a bus and a couple cars that people could be in. And like, maybe this isn't a common occurrence, maybe this isn't something that they expected him to do, it just seems kind of weird. Maybe this is something entirely new and the government didn't expect him to do this. In which case, I hope that this is brought up later, because Eggman obviously cannot get off scot-free for the kind of stuff that he did. But it also just kind of feels like, it also really doesn't seem like the government cares a whole lot about Eggman. Although when I really think about it, it's kind of amazing that I can even say that Robotnik killed anyone in this movie, because his machines don't really have a lot. They're not very threatening. They're not threatening for a number of different reasons. In one of the earlier scenes in the film, when Robotnik first meets Tom and he finds out that Tom is hiding Sonic, he has one of his drones attack them. Tom and Sonic duck behind a table, and the drone just keeps firing. It just keeps firing, but it fires above them. It doesn't fire through the table that they are hiding under, because who keeps a bulletproof table? The table, it's obviously not bulletproof. And if it just shot downward a little bit, the two of them are dead. The car chase was also really dumb. When the big truck drone comes up from behind them, it could just fire like an EMP at them, but instead it fires a fucking harpoon. And I mean, okay, I would have thought that the EMP grenades would have been better, but okay, that's fine. I mean, yeah, just ruin your element of surprise, but okay. And then, of course, it chases them in smaller and smaller robots as it goes along. One of them is literally just a drone on a wheel, and the wheel has like 2 spikes, and it's trying to pop one of their tires as they're driving, which is really dumb because since it's about the size of a normal drone, you'd think that, you know, you could build guns that are built into it, because if it could just pop the tire from afar, then it wouldn't need to get close to them in the first place. What's even weirder is that it has a smaller flying drone inside of it that does have a laser built into it. And when that drone chases after them, instead of using its laser to pop their tires like the last one was trying to do, it instead, it cuts off the top of the car, which, as far as I'm aware, doesn't do anything at all. And it's a bomb. The drone is also a bomb, and it can stick to any surface, so it could just blow up the car. I mean, Eggman clearly doesn't care what happens to Tom or Sonic, so long as he, you know, gets the body, I mean. But, like, it could literally just blow up the car, and it just doesn't. Like, you get the idea. These robots aren't very threatening, and they're defeated really easily. And I mean, not just by Sonic either. They're defeated even pretty easily by Tom, although it would at least make sense that Sonic is able to beat them. In fact, it makes a lot of sense why Sonic would be able to keep up with these things, because he's kind of overpowered in this film. The guy literally knocks out almost all technology in California, which kind of makes you wonder if he could also use it on the robots. There's even a scene when, near the end, when Sonic uses his electricity on Robotnik's hovercraft, but nothing really happens, so maybe his machines are immune. But, like, could you imagine if in this scene Sonic just did another EMP wave and the fight was over? This is another thing that I hope that they address in the sequel, because even without Knuckles, Sonic is kind of broken. Like I said, the film isn't super good, There have been worse films with bigger problems that made up for them with everything else that they had to offer, but the characters aren't nearly good enough to make up for them in this case. That said, I still think it's a fun time, but it's definitely one of the most 5 out of 10 films I've ever watched. Now, at the time of writing this, I've just gotten back from Sonic 2, so if you don't want any spoilers, you should leave now. Just know that if you like the first one, you'll probably like the second one, because it's about the same in terms of quality. Let's get to the good stuff first. Sonic and Robotnik remained relatively the same in the second one, which is good, because I felt like both of them were pretty serviceable in the first one. Tails was also fine, though I don't really have much to say about him. He's the same as he was in the games. He has confidence issues, but Sonic then helps him gain those back in a pretty short arc in the movie. Actually, if anything, Knuckles was kind of my favorite character this time around. One thing that I don't normally like about how Knuckles is portrayed in media recently is that they try to portray him as just the big dumb muscle head whose main defining characteristic is that he's stupid, which doesn't really seem to mesh well with what I feel his origins should be, but at the same time, making him this wise clansman of Angel Island doesn't really fit that well either with the kind of character who got tricked into helping Eggman twice. This version, I feel, strikes a very clear balance between the two. He's almost like Starfire or Drax, in that he's not stupid because he's dumb, he's just not in familiar territory. He doesn't know what anything is, and so he acts in a way that makes him look like he's dumb, because he just doesn't know anything about this world. There have definitely been an increase in notable nods and hints towards the video games. There's the obvious ones like the Master Emerald, the appearance of the tornado, there's the Death Egg robot at the end, and Gun also makes its first appearance in this movie. But I was really surprised when I found out that Dr. Stone's coffee shop was a reference to Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine. It's all really great, and there's lots of stuff for fans, but at the end of the day, it is just fan service. The plot starts off with Eggman on the Mushroom Planet. He sends off a giant surge into space, similar to the one at the start of the last film, in hopes that someone will see it and rescue him. Knuckles then comes here, who thought that Sonic was at this location, and wants to find out where Sonic is because he believes Sonic knows where the Master Emerald is. And Eggman and Knuckles team up so that they can find it. Tails then finds out not long afterwards that Knuckles is looking for Sonic, so he goes to Earth to warn Sonic that Knuckles is looking for him, and the two help each other look for a compass that'll help them find the Master Emerald. It all culminates in a massive fight near the end, where Sonic uses the Emerald to become Super Sonic and destroys the Death Egg robot at the end. Like the first film, there's a number of questions that I have about the premise. Something that does feel a little bit convenient is how Sonic and Tails figure out about the Master Emerald. So the way that they figure it out is that Sonic looks at his map of the different worlds that he can travel to, and he puts his finger on the Master Emerald symbol on the map, and then it glows, and then it shows a hologram of Longclaw from the first movie, and then she tells them about the Master Emerald, and that there's a compass that'll find it. Then he turns over to the other side of the map, and it shows that it from what Sonic says, it just says that the compass is in Siberia. There's nothing about the inciting incident in this film that directly correlates to how he figures out about these things. And that's important because that kind of implies that he could have figured out about either of these well before now. Like, if all it took was for him to put his finger over the emerald symbol, how hasn't, this happened long ago? And if he can tell that the back of the map is pointing to Siberia, why hasn't he gone up there to check out what it was pointing to in the first place? Because that seems oddly suspicious if it is pointing to a place on this world specifically, and not any of the other worlds featured on the map. Like, I suppose I can believe that he just never figured out about it. It just seems really convenient. The characters, on the other hand, do alleviate this a little bit. I don't necessarily know if they're better than the last film's characters. There are elements that are better, and there are some elements that are worse. An example of the former is definitely Sonic's arc, which is probably the one that I like the most out of either film by far. So the film starts off with Sonic chasing after some bank robbers that are driving away in a truck full of money. and he tries to save the day, but he does it really horribly, and he's called out on it, rightfully so, because he did a shit job. Then afterwards, he gets a talk from Tom, who scolds him for all the stuff that he did last night, and the overall implication being Sonic wants to be a hero, but cares more about looking like a hero than actually being one, and doesn't fully understand what it means to be a hero. And that's sort of his whole arc in this film, is just figuring out what it means to be a hero. And Tom's words were that a hero isn't someone who just takes care for themselves. Being a hero is all about taking responsibility for other people. Later on in the film, Tails gets hurt, and Sonic recognizes that this is his fault, and then later goes on to catch Eggman and Knuckles on his own, which ultimately backfires because while he and Knuckles are fighting with one another, Eggman then gets the Emerald, something that wouldn't have happened had he not left Tails behind. And it's sort of emblematic of this idea that even when Sonic thinks that he understands what being a hero is, he still doesn't, because it's not about just doing things on your own. And of course, at the very end, then they all realize that only together can they beat Dr. Robotnik once he's gotten the power of the Master Emerald. Oh yeah, and there's also another really neat moment when Sonic rescues Knuckles just after their fight, also demonstrating a level of responsibility that he's grown. But even by the end of the film, he doesn't see himself as a hero, and he still acknowledges that he has a lot to learn, which is a good thing because it shows that there's still some more room for his character to grow in the next movie. It's a very average story, not too difficult to tell, but honestly, compared to a lot of other media we've been getting in recent years, and I don't just mean video game adaptations, like the fact that it's done this well is honestly impressive. So yeah, Sonic's character in this film is by far my favorite. Tails, on the other hand, is kinda weird. He's not necessarily bad, it's just his introduction is a little strange to me. He's introduced as Sonic's stalker, even though that's not what they say directly. The way, after the big surge at the baseball field in the first film, Tails took notice, and he's been watching Sonic ever since. And I mean he has been watching him literally all the time. They even make a joke that Tails watches him when he's bathing, and they move on from it really quickly, but that's really creepy that you're watching when Sonic is in the bathroom. That's really weird. Like I said, he doesn't have a lot of confidence, and his story is all about gaining some of that confidence back by helping Sonic. But it's a really short arc that's resolved almost immediately once the two of them go to Siberia and have a dance-off with some other people in a bar. But I don't even necessarily buy that he doesn't have confidence. There's many times, even before the resolution of Tails' arc, that shows that he is his own agent. He rescues Sonic by running over Knuckles with a police car, and the two of them leave in the car before Knuckles gives chase. And Tails is more calm about the situation than Sonic is. Tails literally describes Knuckles as the most fearsome warrior in the galaxy. He is being chased by the most fearsome warrior in the galaxy, and he is surprisingly calm. The amount of gadgets that he has, and just the capabilities that they have, the fact that these gadgets can take out highly trained soldiers commissioned by the United Nations, and they can be taken out by accident with these things, really doesn't imply that, Tails isn't independent in some way? And I just don't buy the idea that he just doesn't have confidence. I can see that there are ways that he could lack confidence. Obviously, there are times when he shows that lack of confidence, but there's so many other examples that almost seem to run counter to it. I don't feel like there's enough consistency in the idea that he doesn't have his own agency. Robotnik is also one that I have mixed feelings towards. We don't learn that much more about his backstory than we did in the first one, although at this point, more exposition about his childhood would almost feel forced at this point. I'm glad they kept his superiority complex, and it seems to be consistent with how I interpreted it in the first film. After teaming up with Knuckles, Robotnik doesn't see any need to keep Dr. Stone around, except so that he can get his drones back. But once he has them back, he's just like, nah, we're gonna leave Dr. Stone here, and just ditches him entirely. But then does the same thing to Knuckles after he gets the Master Emerald, and comes back to Dr. Stone and takes him in again as his underling, showing that he always has to have some number two, someone else who he feels mentally superior to in some way. And I feel like that's a very good part of his character. And his relationship with Dr. Stone is also one that I find a little bit interesting because, like, Dr. Stone obviously notices that Eggman is not the same before he left for the Mushroom Forest. Like, most notably, the mustache and the fact that he's bald, which I'm very glad that they noticed that, because I feel like in other movies, they would have just written Stone as though nothing has changed. But there's also some other moments where it kind of feels like Stone is slowly catching on that Robotnik is not his friend. So I'm really looking forward to how they're going to flesh this out a lot more in the next film, and maybe we will have a moment where Dr. Stone finally realizes that Robotnik isn't his friend, and there'll be some kind of cool resolution to this subplot. Okay, so at the time of recording this, I found out that Jim Carrey is retiring, and that he will most likely not return as Dr. Eggman in the third film. So I guess there goes my hopes for any kind of resolution to this subplot. I mean, hey, more power to him. I don't know. I'm kind of sad. Anyways, my mixed feelings come in regarding Robotnik's motivations. In the previous film, he was just working for the United States government, even though he was very clearly testing the boundaries of what he was allowed to do. In this film, he just straight up acknowledges he wants to conquer the world. And I mean, I feel like that's a necessary development for his character. This is Eggman we're talking about. It just doesn't feel like there is a natural progression from where he was in the last film to where he is now. I think what the film is getting at is that he develops this motivation because of his time in the Mushroom Planet, and then he kind of went insane. I mean, I guess that's an explanation. I don't know. Maybe I was wrong to, expect a little bit more out of these films than what I see in the Book of Boba Fett. It just doesn't really seem like a good enough excuse to just have that kind of development as just explained away because he was on a mushroom planet for years. I don't know. Maybe that's just me. It feels weird to me. And he's obviously treated as a bad guy, even by Gunn this time around, as well he should. I felt like there should have been consequences for the people who he endangered in the last film. I don't know. Maybe this is just me, but it kind of feels like they're not entirely... It feels like Gunn is only treating him as a bad guy because this is where Eggman has become the world-conquering bad guy he's supposed to be, rather than... he endangered and even killed some people in the last film. I don't get the impression that they are even self-aware of the damages that he caused in the last film. Maybe I'd have to watch the film a second time for it to make sense. There's just some things about Eggman's character that feels weird to me. There's nothing here definitively that I can say is necessarily bad, I guess. It just feels off. The robots also haven't been improved too much. Luckily, there weren't a whole lot of examples where it felt like the robots should have been able to defeat our protagonists and just didn't, because most of the time, they're only ever on screen when Knuckles and Eggman aren't directly dealing with Sonic and Tails, which luckily isn't a lot, and they only ever deal with Sonic and Tails, who seem like they can handle their own pretty reasonably. They're still piss easy to deal with, like, there's a snowboarding scene where Sonic literally just takes out several drones by throwing snowballs at them, which, yeah, that doesn't help with their menace at all. Conversely, Sonic is still insanely overpowered. They still haven't really addressed the fact that he can just shoot out EMPs that can turn off electronics. I guess we're just gonna assume that they just don't work on robots. I don't know, I feel like there should be a more direct explanation as to why he doesn't try that a second time. Given how easily they're able to be taken out every other way, I don't believe that Sonic couldn't just shut down all robots with a giant EMP wave. Although luckily, at least in this film, the climax doesn't feel like it could be resolved that way, since the Death Egg robot is powered by the Master Emerald. So it's not as big a problem, I just kind of wish it was given a little bit more, I just wish it was focused on a little bit more. And of course, Sonic's speed is also, Sonic's speed is also just as inconsistent in this film as it was in the last. When Sonic and Tails go to the Himalayas, they find themselves in a bar, and all the bar patrons want to kill them and throw them into a fire, but instead of just, running away or beating them all up, because Sonic could easily do that, just like he did in the last film, instead he gets caught up in a dance-off with them, because we need a conclusion to Tails' arc, and the guy that they have a dance-off with ends up stealing their map so they can't even leave. But again, Sonic could just go really fast and steal the map, and then beat them all up. Like, there's no reason why he couldn't do this. And unfortunately, this problem also extends to Knuckles. His strength is also inconsistent in this movie. Like I mentioned earlier, there's a scene where Tails rescues Sonic by driving over Knuckles with a police car, but despite being able to stop Sonic at his fastest, he can't stop a car. There's also a scene near the end where he gets trapped underneath a giant stone pillar, and he doesn't just break it or lift it, and apparently it's too heavy for him to lift without Sonic's help, which, again, given all the kinds of things that he does in this movie, again, just being able to stop Sonic, he clearly has enough strength to lift a pillar, and there's a couple of times in this film where he should have been able to use his strength to solve whatever predicament he was in, and he just doesn't. Tails luckily didn't have any inconsistencies. I just have some questions about what his technology can do. His computer is just an automatic translator for everything, and luckily I don't think that will break anything in the future. I just think it's very odd that it can just translate alien languages that he is completely unfamiliar with. Not a huge problem. It can also create a bunch of clones of him. Again, nothing too breaking, and luckily they don't forget that he has it. And there's never really a time when I felt like they should have used it and they just forgot about it. I'm sort of hoping that doesn't happen in the third film. There's also the fact that Tails was able to watch Sonic and pinpoint his exact location from where he was in the universe. So Tails can just watch other people across the galaxy, which kind of also implies that he can watch anyone anywhere in the world. And I won't go into the ethical implications of that, but again, it's not necessarily a problem, it just feels like one of those things that they may forget about in the third film, and I'm hoping that they don't, because if there's ever a time that they need to, see something or find out where something is, they have a means to be able to look literally anywhere in the galaxy, let alone the world. And I'm just kind of hoping that they don't forget that they have that. And actually, speaking about viewing across the galaxy, that was also something that didn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. So, Tails picks up on the charge that was set off at the baseball field in the last film, but Knuckles didn't notice that. And I guess I can believe that. It's just... So then how did Knuckles notice the charge that was set off at the Mushroom Planet, but not the one that was on Earth? The only thing I can think of is that whatever Tails was using to detect that charge, it just has a longer range, and Earth was just more out of range than the Mushroom Planet was. I don't know. Again, it's just one of those things that also just seems weird to me. But what also seems weird is how exactly Knuckles is able to track these kinds of things, because as far as I'm aware, his tribe doesn't use technology, and we don't really learn a whole lot about his tribe either. There's a couple of other people who are presumably from his tribe at the very beginning that also go through the portal with him to meet Dr. Eggman, but we never hear about who these people are, where they came from, what Knuckles' relationship to them is, and they're not echidnas, but they wear the same kind of tribesman stuff as the rest of them, but we just never really hear about who these random people are at the beginning of the film, and clearly Knuckles doesn't have a strong relationship with them, because he neither mentions them again nor cares about going back to them after the film. I don't know if this will be addressed later, it was just kind of odd to me. But then there's also something else. Tails' computer can also track Sonic. When he came to their world, he was using his computer to track Sonic's exact location so that he could find him. And this I feel is also one of those kinds of things that the third film may easily forget about. People can now track Sonic, and maybe even Knuckles, potentially. I don't know if necessarily their powers are the same thing. They certainly look kind of similar, at least aesthetically. But, like, Sonic can be tracked. And I think that they implied that in the first film, but now that it's a certainty that you can build a computer that is capable of tracking Sonic's exact location. So I'm hoping that again, is not a problem here. I don't think that there's ever a time when this isn't utilized, and it should be. It's just something that I hope that they remember in the future, that they have all these kinds of things, because some of these feel like they might be forgotten, and we may get a scene in the third movie where they should be used and just aren't. And this goes especially for the Chaos Emeralds. So, like I mentioned, at the very end, Sonic gets the 7 Chaos Emeralds and turns into Super Sonic, and that's how he defeats Dr. Eggman. So, Sonic can turn super whenever he wants now. He just has the emeralds. This is just something that he can do now, which means that the next movie will have to find a way to separate him from the Chaos Emeralds so that he doesn't just invalidate any kind of conflict that he's in. I could maybe imagine some fight scenes that could be cool between Super Sonic and someone else. Like, the way that they were able to get the Master Emerald back from Dr. Eggman is Knuckles punches the emerald out of Eggman, which makes sense because that's what he did in Sonic 3. So, like, there's precedent for that now. Someone could now theoretically punch the super out of Sonic, and you can create, like, an interesting kind of... Well, I mean, if someone knows how to use it. So, now you can make this interesting game of chicken. Sonic is a god in his super form, so he can beat whoever he's fighting with one punch, but at the same time, if whoever he's fighting can also punch the chaos out of him, then the fight will also end in just one hit. And I feel like you can make an interesting kind of fight out of that, where the whole thing ends with one hit, and the two characters have to try to keep their distance, but at the same time, I don't necessarily know if these writers are smart enough to make a scene like that. But either way, that's definitely something that they'll have to focus on. Now, I don't remember entirely. I could be wrong entirely about all this, because I can't confirm, but I think one of the things that happened is that after he turned off Super Sonic, the Chaos Emeralds just flew into the air and I guess went someplace else. I could be wrong about that. I don't know why they would do that. I mean, I guess that would be the explanation, but, like, they don't address it, and it could just be just one little scene that I just missed, which, I mean, yeah, would resolve this problem. If that's not the case, then I'm hoping that that'll be addressed later, if he does still have the Chaos Emeralds, because they have the Master Emerald. That's the thing that they have. I would wonder what exactly, the usefulness of the Master Emerald is if you don't have the Chaos Emerald, since in this movie, it gets its power from the Chaos Emeralds. So I wonder what the point of having that around is if there's enough, if it doesn't do anything. So that's the only reason why I'm unsure. But maybe I'm just wrong about all this. Yeah, much like the last film, there's not enough good writing, I feel, as far as the characters go, that can make up for all the bad that's here. The film wants to have all these things together, and in the process, the writers completely skim over some important plot elements. And this is nowhere more prevalent than when Gunn captures Sonic. So, Tom and Maddie are at a wedding for most of the film, and at one point, Sonic is running away from the egg drones, or sorry, not the egg drone, he was running away from, like, a big avalanche in Siberia, and he calls Tom to try to save them and to portal them out of there. He gets out of there, but then it turns out that the whole wedding was actually a setup by Gunn to capture them. And then afterwards, Maddie and her sister have to go rescue Sonic, Tails, and Tom, who were arrested by Gunn. This is stupid for a number of different reasons. So, first of all, Gunn doesn't detain Maddie, despite also being, well, I guess I'll go down the list. So first of all, Gunn knew that Sonic and Tom were still in contact with one another. So why have they not arrested Tom before? Why did they drop why isn't Tom still a fugitive, like he was in the last film? Shouldn't he still be wanted for harboring Sonic, if they still cared? Like, obviously they may not be able to catch Sonic, but, like, it doesn't mean just don't do anything. You can still have him be a wanted fugitive. In fact, if anything, if you make that known around the world, it'll make it harder for them to hide because they will always have to be on the move. Don't just drop that entirely. And even then, like, they could at least arrest Tom for helping Sonic, and then they could potentially use him as bait to lure in Sonic. That's a much better plan than just having an arbitrary wedding that you have no idea Sonic will even show up to. And if it weren't for like an incredibly stupid scene where Thomas trying to swap out the wedding ring for one of the teleporter rings, if it wasn't for that, Sonic would have never showed up in the first place and all of this would have been for nothing. It's so dumb. Like, they don't even try to contact Dr. Stone or any one of Eggman's other colleagues so that they can get access to their technology and their drones and try to continue catching Sonic that way. Like, they knew that Sonic was still here. That's the biggest thing about this. And they've just not really done anything about it. And then once they do arrest them, they completely leave Tails' backpack just unattended, which is full of gadgets that Maddie and her sister use to wipe the floor with highly trained gun soldiers. It's really dumb. Luckily, it only lasts for 10 minutes, but a lot of it just feels like filler. It feels almost unnecessary, because even afterwards, I'm not entirely sure if Gunn ever gave a reason why they don't want Sonic anymore. Once Sonic and Tails escape, Sonic just continues where he was originally and goes after Eggman and Knuckles to get the Master Emerald. Almost, like none of this ever happened. And as far as I'm aware, Gunn just drops any and all charges against Tom and Sonic like they did in the last film. I mean, maybe they didn't and I just missed that, or maybe they gave a reason for it. A lot of it feels like it's just here for padding, because so little of it makes sense. This is all just from a first watch. There's probably a lot more wrong with this particular scene if I watched it a second time, but I think you get the point. These films aren't great, though they're not exactly terrible either. As a Sonic fan, I can say that I had a fun time, and there are certainly worse films in bigger franchises that you could be watching. But I don't know if I would necessarily recommend them on any basis besides being a fan. And given that Shadow the Hedgehog was teased in the after credits, I'm only all the more curious how they're going to handle an adaptation of Sonic Adventure. I think you should see it while it's still in theaters. Just make sure that you watch it at a time when there probably wouldn't be a whole lot of children there. My theater was chock full of children that literally would not shut up, and part of me kind of wishes that I had picked any other day to watch the film. But I wouldn't fault you either if you didn't, because they can still do better. So like I said, this was all something that was put together really quickly, just my initial thoughts on a film right out the theater. I'm making another one of these while I'm working on a much longer video, so if you'd like to see more while I'm taking my time on that, let me know what you think of this format, if I should do more, and what you'd like me to cover in the future. And while you're at it, have an excellent day, and stay platinum!